Welcome to the Impactful Leadership Show. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. John Lennon once said, "A dream you dream alone is only a dream. A dream you dream together is reality." Join me as we connect dreams to reality by chatting with innovators from around Washington, D.C. Our show is proudly sponsored by the D.C. chapter of the Entrepreneurs Organization. This is the Impactful Leadership Show. Welcome to the Impactful Leadership Show. I'm your host, Greg McDonough, the managing partner of Blackburn Capital Advisors. Today's guest is a leader in the education technology industry, a guest speaker at the Technical University in Berlin, founding member of Edtech Founders Club, the co-founder and CEO of Morressier. You have to correct my pronunciations. Please welcome Sam, and I'm going to mess up your last name, so I'll let you do your last name.
Very good. So it's Morressier and it's Sami Benchekroun. So here we go.
Benchekroun. Brilliant. You're the toughest I've had so far, so I had to punt that back to you. It's great to have you on the show. So our podcast is focused on leadership, and my favorite question to ask my podcast guests is, Sami, tell me about some misconceptions in leadership.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. So I think, generally speaking, I think there's three general misconceptions that come up my mind. The one that I'm experiencing all the time, and it seems to be a very international one, right? I've moved just from Europe to DC. So the first one is that element of makes all decisions, right? You know, you're the leader. You need to make a decision. You know, go ahead and just do it, right? And I think that is sort of the biggest misconception. And the smaller the company or the earlier in that process, the more that misconception is present. And once the company gets larger, I think the danger of that actually holding true is really high. How I see leadership in that regard, to just showcase my view there, is to set the guardrails, right? To put the guardrails and say, this is the direction that we're going, and then within your team, make those decisions yourself. You know where the vision is set. Let's get it going. The second element is about that. How do I call it? That effect of being hero, right? That hero myth. You're sort of the super girl or Superman on top of a mountain, and then being that power person. What I've experienced so far in the course of my business is really elevating the team, right? Really just putting your team and putting everyone else on top of that mountain, giving out those Supergirl and Superman capes, but not having it on yourself. But really being that facilitator, right? So being actually in the second row and guiding the way. And the last one really is something that I didn't understand for quite a long time, which is that aspiration of everyone wanting to be a leader, right? Those conception of you hire a person and you talk with that person, say, what are your plans? Where do you want to head up? And you have, in most cases, those people that say, well, I'm aspiring to be a good leader. I really want to go that management path, and be that and be that people's manager. And I think that idea of leadership having many components than just being affiliated to people, but being also a leadership that sort of leads by example and leads because she or he does something extraordinarily well, or is really someone that just masters her or his art, is something that is not valued enough, I feel. And I think that the strongest leaders, if you will, just from a leadership perspective at Morressier, are those that do not manage people directly, but those that showcase by sort of the day-to-day, showcasing their activities and their abilities on how incredible their leadership is. So that's sort of the three aspects of how I would see the biggest misconceptions of leadership.
That's great. That's really insightful. And I'd love to dig in a little bit further on that first one when you're talking about guardrails. And especially for those when you're starting a business, right? You're on your own. you don't have any guardrails, right? You're in full control. Then you start adding a team, you start adding clients. And at some point in time in that leadership journey, as you're growing your business, to your point, you need to just inform the team of where the guardrails are versus showing them or dictating where the guardrails are. Walk us through some of your journey in that aspect, from building your business to where it is today, and how you've changed your sort of your leadership style.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I must say that I've failed in that activity almost all the time, right? I think we're starting to sort of get it better and better, but I think it's one of the hardest activities, and I definitely failed a lot in the beginning to get it right, because the difficulty that I encountered that I still find incredibly hard to assess is that notion of when to hand over ownership, when to give up a little bit of your own ownership when you are sort of in the middle of the process. What is the right time to say, well, now I can dare making mistakes, because I do feel that it has something to do also to letting go and to letting other people add their thought process and that adding their ideas to the table. So that notion of when to let go and when to really manage the process very, very tightly, the timing question is incredibly hard. So one time when I feel I did not too much of a bad job there was when I felt that there is sort of a beginning repeatability in place, right? So the moment you say, well, it's not just a client by accident, which happens in the beginning a lot. You get a client, you say, oh, well, how did I get that? And then there's the second, and sort of came differently. But the moment you see patterns in your clients that you get, I feel that's the moment where you can start letting go a little bit and say, all right, nice. Now we sort of found that repeatability, and now I can add more people that add maybe creative ways to scale faster or scale differently, more efficiently, whatever it is. But that sort of helped me in timing that. And then after all, it's all about the people that you hire, right? So it's a talent question, right? And also there, I think I've made a lot of mistakes in the past where I had some thinking about what would be the perfect person in that seat, and then I sort of didn't do a good job in assessing the needs very well, and then I put someone else that is in another area of the business excellent, but in what I needed in that time, really not excellent at all, right? So it's sort of that match between the job that needs to be done and the person that I need to put in that seat, and overlapping that is heavily difficult. It's heavily difficult. So very, very early on, I think people with entrepreneurial mindset that you can literally put in many places that can have different hats on is always helpful, but they're very hard to find.
Certainly. Have you, over your experience, picked up any tricks in that matchmaking process, either from the interview questioning or as you manage people? Or talk to us about like things that you've learned that have helped you with that matchmaking process.
Yeah. So my general rule of thumb that I'm applying now more and more is quite frankly, the more time I spend in the recruiting process, and me personally, the better I can assess the person. So in other words, when I basically do something that is a little bit against what I feel I need to focus on, and focus on growing the business, getting more clients, and really just heads down and just executing, at least in the beginning of the company. I realized that the more I spend in the actual recruiting process, the better the talent. So it's sort of that nuance of saying, well, I need to take one step back or take it a little bit slower in order to assess talent properly that then fit into that seat. Versus what I did several times, I stayed in that execution modus, and I stayed in my thinking of, I need to win the next client, I need to win the next client, I need to get to the next funding round or whatever it is, and just looked very quickly, all right, CV, check. Nice, might be a good fit. Let's try it out. And unfortunately, it rarely worked. So spending time in that talent, with new talent, and really working with that talent, and really confronting with the challenges that one has, is a high priority. Really, time spent. And I have a couple of friends that did something that I never dared to do, but at some point I want to try it out. Is spending time with the talent in like a 1, 2, 3 day workshop character. So you really invite people and say, well, let's work together on these challenges in order to find out how we work together and if you are actually a fit for the challenges that I have. So I think that there is a correlation between time invest and quality, or matchmaking between the challenge and the person.
That's very, very well said. When you think about mistakes that we've made in recruiting and hiring talent, it's always around those times that we were distracted by clients or shareholders or some other, and the talent is actually more important, right?
Yeah.
More of our time should be focused on our talent development than our client development.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more, because, and it's something that I'm still in the process of really understanding, right? So that element of culture, that element of team assessment, the element of talent acquisition, it needs to be really the most of the time that one spends as the founder of the company, as the CEO of the company, needs to be around the people, And it is, and I remember back to the time when I started the company, I didn't feel that way. I thought very much it's the money that comes in that needs to be my number one priority. But that doesn't scale. That is a model that lets you stick to a one man or one woman show, because you are the only person that drives change. And that, so if you don't get the right talent on board that then drives change, so that you can focus sort of on the next level of the company, nothing will really happen. And I have a couple of idols, if you will, in other founders that scaled their companies to insane heights. When talking to them, repeatedly you hear, it's the talent. It's how you manage that. How do you hire? How do you fire? Who do you hire at what point? How fast do you? That is quintessential for the success of the company. And I they were much smarter than I am. They're fellow EO people, by the way, much smarter than I am. So I'm start getting into that thinking and into that mindset. But now realizing it, we emphasize a lot on it at Morressier, and we can really tell that things are being moved forward much faster and much better.
It's interesting. Your response there really feeds into the second misconception that you brought up when you're talking about being the hero or the top of the pyramid. And as the business develops, at some point in time, you're not on the top. Like, you're really on it's still the same pyramid, because there's only one person or one small team. But now the tip of the pyramid is at the bottom. Yeah. And as a leader, you're supporting your entire team. Yeah. What is there a certain phase in an entrepreneurial journey or a business life cycle that you've seen that flip happen?
Yeah, I need to think a little bit about that one, because it's a tough one to assess. I think that there is not that one answer to that, because it really depends a little bit what kind of business you are. There are B2B businesses with massive sales cycles that need to focus on different elements in the earlier stages. Then there is B2C companies that have a much higher velocity, where you need certain other people at certain times. So you have agency models where you have yet another set of sort of time frame. So I think it depends heavily on what kind of business you are. What I do feel is a general truth is that the moment you hit sort of that, you add management layer. So the moment you hit sort of that time frame where you are not managing like execution driven operators, But when you start managing managers, and then they start managing them again, managers, that pivot changes the dynamic dramatically. And I think that the moment you have that, these cycles, you manage people that manage other people that then manage, the moment that the layer gets more complex, that's the moment I feel you need to really think about that hero myth, if you will, that element of who can drive big topics internally forward, and who can be that hero, who you can enable, who you can put on that mountain with the superwoman or superman cape on, who can then drive things forward. So I think that's it. Before, if you manage people that are operators, I think you still drive a lot yourself. So in our case, it was around the 50, 60 people mark, where we saw that there is a little bit of a shift happening in perception. And now that we're now double the size, we see another flip, if you will. So there's yet another emphasis on that hero element. So we see that there is different stages in the company and different needs in there.
Interesting. So digging a little bit deeper into your team and your business, talk to us about what your business does, how you got into your industry, and what was the random walk that ended you where you are today?
It's a special industry because it's sort of that, let's say, non-obvious problem. So one of our first investors says, I love you guys, but I love you because you're tackling a non-obvious problem. so we're in the business of non-obvious problems. So the pitch that I do is, so Morressier, first of all, is a platform for the scholarly industry. So every institution, society, company that deals with scientific content and scientific data, they can use our platform to manage from end to end their entire flow. We do quality assessment, we support in exchanging data and content, we support with virtual and hybrid events for community building, we support in publishing scientific and academic content. So it's a very integrated platform. I would even say infrastructure play for that industry. And how I entered in there is I think it was 6 years ago, when I stumbled upon something that is called scientific and academic conferences. And if you look at scientific and academic conferences, you see a structure that is basically stuck in the 50s or 60s. You have something that is called paper posters. So literally printed out papers that you put on a wall, where scientists summarize their findings and exchange on the conference and discuss at the conference what they have found. And it's a paper poster printed on the wall. That's an international phenomenon. And then on the other hand, you have basically overhead projectors, right? And I say overhead projectors because presentation, unfortunately, are slide by slide by slide by slide. You could do as well on an overhead projector. So you have basically, written stuff on a one-page paper, no multimedia, no nothing. So you have paper and you have overhead projector at conferences, and they're supposed to showcase rocket science, oncology research, HIV research, COVID research, right? The state-of-the-art stuff is presented on posters and on overhead projectors. So when I understood that, I sort of thought, oh, wow, there's, it seems to be the only place that is not hit by digital innovation and that is not hit by sort of, IT infrastructure, if you will. So that was the starting point, the realization that there is still a dark place where connectivity is not really there. And we really felt the urge to basically say, well, wait a second, there is an opportunity to create that internet moment, right? That moment of not connected to connected in a world that actually touches all of us, right? And science is sort of the foundational piece for everything that we do day in, day out. Everything, our computers is just a scientific miracle. All the drugs and the cures and vaccines and so on. has its roots in science, but it's not yet in that digital space when it comes to the communication. And that's where we say, hey, there's a huge opportunity for us. And we want to tackle it. Back then, we were very naive to not understand that it's a highly complex industry. And that was the reason why it wasn't digitized yet. But we're getting there now.
So that's fascinating. What were you doing when you had that discovery? Were you running this business and then turned in that and doing something different or something in the IT space, tech space, and then saw that opportunity and turned? Or were like, how did, like, give us the background of because clearly you had to have had your eyes and ears open for this and have the technical expertise to do it. So you know, the years leading up to that, what were you involved in?
Yeah. So I think that there's two dynamics, two very, very important things that sort of happen. So, if you will, biographical accidents that led to where we are now. One is both of my parents are doctors, and they are very scientifically sort of sound and almost instead of going into a career in medicine, they were doing a lot of science, right? But my parents are coming from third world countries, right? So my mother is from Poland and my father's from Morocco. So this notion of accessibility of science was sort of always very present. This idea of saying, well, if you are lucky and you're born in a Western country and you're born in a surrounding where you can get access to knowledge quite easily by just going into the library, because most libraries in the States or in Western Europe, they're very sophisticated. You see everything, and the university are well equipped, right? But in Poland and Morocco, it's definitely not the case, right? Or back then it definitely wasn't the case. So this notion of the accessibility of content and knowledge we discussed as a family quite often already. So that and then there is the second dynamics, which is I was always a computer geek, and I did some freelance work for an agency that would work for infrastructure challenges on conferences. So they were very niche oriented, how to build networks structures on conferences, how to connect the halls with one another, how to create sort of all the IP address stuff. And so I worked for them, and that gave me the opportunity to travel around and to actually see those conferences, those scientific conferences, in a real life. And that combination of knowing a little bit about it through my parents, but then being on those conferences and really seeing, oh, wow, this is antiquated, was sort of the dynamic for me to say, all right, I got to do something.
That's wonderful. It is always interesting how the stars line up and guide us to wherever we are, and it's always a mystery of life, I guess.
I fully agree, and it sort of continued also on our journey on how I met my first investor who believed in us, because this is like again a non-obvious problem, right? I by accident was at that conference and spoke to someone who then knew this other person by accident and then connected us, and then stars aligned that we happened to be in London at the same time. There's so many things where I say, well, what's happening here? This can't be true, but it sort of all came together one by one, and retro. So sort of the hindsight is, I think you can create that serendipity, right? You can create those moments of where lucky coincidences are just happening, and that's, I feel, by doing, right. So now in retrospective, I just look at that little stars aligning moment, or quite frankly, we did so many things around it that we just don't that we try to forget, because there was a lot of failure on the way, and then that one moment was a success, and that brought us sort of forward. So I think that it's a matter also of inner attitude, right? Do you want to succeed, and then you look for it, as you said, right? And then it seems like the stars align, but there's a lot of inner ambitions that need to come. Is just sitting at home doesn't really move the needle, right?
So Sami, shifting gears just slightly, you'd mentioned you've taken on investor money. I suspect we've got audience members who are running their business, contemplating taking on outside investment. Any words of advice to founders, business owners who are contemplating taking outside funding?
We could spend, I think, the entire afternoon just talking about that. But when just boiling every down, I think that the most important experience, or the most important learning that I've had, is to make a conscious decision based on a very clear need. The way I looked at venture funding and venture capital and back was always, that's just the only way, right? You want to scale, that's venture capital, right? There's just that one. So I was romanticizing, if you will, that idea of getting venture capital on board. But very clearly speaking, it's just one way of financing among a gazillion of others. So the company that I would found in the future, the way I would approach it is to really, first of all, understand what I want to achieve, right? Because there's many models to success, right? You don't need to take venture capital in order to succeed the business. So there needs to be a need, and it's not often that this need arises, right? Do you have a scalable business that really scales fast in a massive market, right? All those questions you need to ask yourself very deliberately, and be not blinded by that romantic idea to have suddenly 10 million or 20 or 30 or 100 million on the bank account that you can then freely spend, because that's definitely not how it works. So the need must be there. And then I think the other point there is you got to have a business that works and that can be repeated and that can sort of scale on the basis of a lot of money, because spending wrongly is very easy. Spending right and deploying capital in an efficient way so that the business scales is a tough thing. So and what I say, too much money on the account doesn't help in spending correctly. If you're a business that does not take venture capital, it's much easier to make a right investment decision, because you're limited in cash. So there's many things, and I would always go for it in a very conscious way, because it's not always the path to go. Definitely, but by far not.
That's great. That's great advice. So looking forward, what has you excited about your industry, your business? Talk to us about what you're looking to get into in the next couple of years.
Yeah. You know what? I think so. That's a great question, and the answer is I'm so insanely excited about the industry, and there's many reasons for that. The recent weeks and the recent month sort of emphasize the necessity and the need for me to be in that industry, and I'm so passionate about that industry, right? I'm going to give you a couple of examples. So first of all, we are acting in a rather conservative industry, right? We act with scientific societies, with institutions, a little bit larger institution. We sometimes work with governments and large R&D heavy industries. So it's more slow moving in the past. COVID accelerated that thinking mindset, that mindset of saying, well, wait a second, we need to have a digital agenda, right? We need to have sort of an idea on how we move forward, on how we innovate, in terms of communication, how we innovate in terms of internal processes. So the last 2-3 years was just a revolution for that industry, because everybody started thinking about it. And I was fortunate enough that we have built our brands also before COVID, so people knew that we're in that space. And the quality of conversations that I've had just skyrocketed. And I was so fortunate to be at the right time, at the right place. Again, stars aligned, if you will. But it was very, very fortunate. And the richness of the conversation and the aspiration of the people in that industry has never been as high as I observe them now. So that's definitely one thing that I'm incredibly excited about. The second element is in the industry of scientific communication, there is sort of that huge dynamic around open access, open science, getting access to scientific output in an open way that started 20 years ago or something like that, but accelerated massively over COVID and through political mandates. Just last Thursday, the White House released a new statement of an open science, open access mandate, which is a pivotal moment in the industry. And I'm so happy to be at that time in DC, quite frankly, and just, 2 stone throws away from the White House, and who released such an important statement, which brings a new challenge to the industry, right? The industry now needs to rethink their entire business models, right? Everything that held true for the last almost 100 years need to be completely overthought, right? So suddenly 80-90% of the revenue that the industry made needs to be overthought, needs to be completely turned upside down. And there needs to be a whole new dynamic around innovation. And technology will play an important role in that. So the timing currently and the things that will happen in the future are absolutely incredible. And again, just the perfect timing for us to be present with a solid platform, with something that supports for exactly these challenges. And the third is that element of let's say, organizing scientific data. The fact that we organize, and that's sort of our slogan, organizing early stage research that we then, that we had from conferences, puts us into the position to look a little bit ahead, right? And I give you an example. Scientific processes typically take 3, 4, 5 years, right? You have a long year of scientific process, and at the end you have a patent or a published output, a published article. Everything that happens in between is not organized yet. That's exactly where we are looking into. So if you think about it, today on our platform, there are topics, abstracts, posters, presentations in a digital form that will at some point be very relevant in terms of a published article, in terms of a paper. So looking back in the times of COVID, half a year earlier, before the first vaccines came out, we already had a discussion on COVID vaccines on our platform because we supported the relevant society that actually would have massive impact onto these vaccinations. So abstracting that and looking ahead and seeing, oh, wow, scientists share the things that they're working on now already on the platform. So we have a window into the future. So making sense out of that, being able to assess it, understanding on how to prioritize, where to say, well, this could be relevant and maybe that not so much. Being able to steer a little bit what will be important in the future. That just, I get goosebumps just thinking about it. And it really, everything when I wake up in the morning, that's what I'm thinking about, is that element of, and it comes back to the first statement that I made, accelerating scientific breakthroughs. How can we be helpful in getting rid of cancer? How can we be helpful of getting rid of HIV? And how can we be helpful in accelerating that process by looking a little bit into the future? So that excites me just day in, day out.
Wow, you've got my hairs in the back of my neck standing up. That is fascinating to think about, using the current research, the current drafts to come up with conclusions of where science will be in the upcoming years. Wow, that's a mind blown. Sami, it's been great having you on the show. I appreciate all your insights. Where can audience members find you? On LinkedIn, email?
Yeah, so I'm very present on LinkedIn. So very happy, reach out on LinkedIn. I have a Twitter handle, so LinkedIn Sami Benchekroun, just my very difficult to pronounce name. And on Twitter at Sami BLN, Sami BLN. And then otherwise, also I'm always up for a coffee. I love these connections. I'm right in the city center of DC, and always happy to get to grab a coffee.
Wonderful. I'll definitely take you up on that coffee.
Perfect.
It's great to have you. Great to have you on the show, Sami.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you so much.
And that's a wrap, my friends. Thank you for spending your time with me. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at impactfulleadershipshow.com. One last food for thought. Walk on with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone.